our tip sheet of social preferences. So a little bit of background. I'm going to spend a little bit of time giving you some details about the research study, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to help with very practical advice on what to do with the information. And so as you all know, nursing homes are shifting towards a person-centered philosophy of care. And person-centered care relies on customizing care to fit the unique needs and preferences of each resident. And of course, in order to do that, the knowledge of someone's everyday preferences can help inform the delivery of care that honors the person. And so one major component of someone's preferences are preferences for their social contact or interaction with other people. And in nursing homes in particular, what we know is that nursing home residents spend a relatively small proportion of their time interacting with other people on a daily basis. It's around between 10 and 16% of their time, according to published studies. And so this indicates a long-standing struggle to provide the optimal environment, activities, and match to a resident's preferences for social contact. And we also know, in terms of the general population and older adults in particular, that higher levels of social integration are associated with longer survival rates, greater perceived quality of life, successful aging, and psychological well-being. So I'm sure you've heard a lot about loneliness. You've seen over in the UK, they have even a minister of loneliness to try and provide some solutions to reduce loneliness across individuals. And so the purpose of this study, we wanted to understand from the perspective of the nursing home resident barriers to social interaction preferences. And we can share with you the full citation of our peer-reviewed articles if you'd like to see that as well. Just let us know. I'll tell you a little bit about the methods of our study. So we interviewed nursing home residents using the Preferences for Everyday Living Inventory, or the PELI as we talk about it. And we talked to 255 residents, and they all had an MMSE greater to or equal to 13. And so there were some that had mild, moderate cognitive impairment in the study. And if you're not familiar with the PELI, it's a comprehensive, reliable instrument that examines the content, meaning, and importance of 72 psychosocial preferences. And it's not just social contact. There's also questions about growth activities, leisure, self-dominion, and enlisting others in care. The directors of nursing across the providers where we recruited residents verified that they had the cognitive capacity to consent and or had a legally authorized representative that could consent for the residents. And the physicians verified cognitive capacity and medical stability. In case, again, you're not familiar with the PELI, here's a sample PELI item. So for example, the main stem, how important is it to you to have regular contact with friends? If it's very important, somewhat important, or important but can't do, there are some probing questions, or nested questions as we call it, to help provide with some detailed information that can guide the plan of care. If it's not important, you simply move on to the next question. And so we had participants, nursing home residents, who volunteered clarifications to explain and contextualize their rating of importance. And so, for example, in the question just above, how important is it to you to spend time with friends? They might have given us, it's a very important, and they might have explained to us what they meant by that. Well, it's really important if I am able to spend time with my friend Sue, but not so important if I have to spend time with somebody that I don't know very well. And the interviewer recorded these comments, and we resulted in over 7,000 unique comments. And what we're presenting to you today are about 1,400 responses provided to the 13 social preference items, such as importance of having regular contact with family, friends, and spending time one-to-one and in groups. And so here's the full list of questions that we're providing information for you today. So you can see even being involved in choosing your roommate was a question, spending time one-on-one with someone, giving gifts, meeting new people. How important is it to you to spend time by yourself? That's still a social preference. Volunteering your time, doing things with groups of people, being a member of a club, participating in religious services or practices, reminiscing about the past, and being around children. And as you'll note, we have 2 items here that are a part of the MDS Section F. And as I mentioned, the responses were transcribed verbatim, so word for word, and we performed a content analysis to classify barriers and situational dependencies associated with the resident preferences. And so these were times where somebody said, well, it depends. It would be more important to me if, or it would be less important to me if. And so sort of when it depended on things, we took note of those. And just in terms of our trustworthiness of our data, we had multiple people coding these data to make sure that our codes were aligned with one another. And any time that we disagreed about how something should be coded, we discussed and reconciled those to consensus during weekly team meetings. And so here I want to share with you some characteristics of the individuals we spoke with. So their average age was 81 years. Most were female. We had about 77% who were Caucasian and about 23% who were African American. On average, they had spent about 923 days in their community. We had about 10% who were veteran status. The average MMSE score was 24.6, so you can see there they were relatively cognitively capable. We had the majority of individuals who were widowed, followed by those who were never married and then separated and divorced, or married and then separated and divorced. The majority of people had a high school education, and then we had some with more than high school and 14% with less than high school. And so next I want to move into the barriers that we found. And so the most frequently mentioned barriers to social interactions were perceived level of choice or opportunity. So individuals who said, well, that's just not offered here, or I don't think that I can, that is an opportunity that I can partake in here. Their level of personal resources, so for example, they can't eat out because they don't have the funds. Their functional ability, and also the provider policies, and I'm going to go into some detail about these in particular. So for example, a barrier related to perceived level of choice. We had residents that perceived their level of choice was a barrier across 12 of the 13 preference questions, and so here are some of their responses. In response to how important is it to you to be a member of a club, someone said, what clubs? There are no clubs here. In regards to the volunteer question, I would like to volunteer, but there are no opportunities to volunteer. In response to the question about spending time with children, this respondent said, we're lacking children here. And then for religious services, someone said, can't do it. I'm a Ukrainian Orthodox and they don't have those types of services. The religion is close, but not exactly. In order to go to Ukrainian Orthodox services, then I would need transportation. Since transportation is an issue, I have to accept what is here. Those again are just examples from the voice of the participants, the nursing home residents, on where they see that there's relatively little choice. Another barrier that residents mentioned were the level of personal resources. And so for example, residents reflected on the difficulty of not having any family left to spend time with families, family being too busy or living far away. And spending time with family is the most important preference across all of our studies that residents tell us. And so that's a really important one. Similarly, residents expressed that friends were dying off, that there were no friends left and no one to talk to. And so again, we see that happening as people outlive their friends, and then it becomes a little challenging to make new friends in residential environments. Friends were also unable to visit because of the distance, so of living again geographically far away. And 30% of residents mentioned barriers related to not being able to afford to give gifts. So again, their level of personal resources were barriers to fulfilling these preferences. Functional ability was mentioned as a barrier for 5 of the 13 social preference questions. So for example, related to the volunteering question, the individual said, can't do that because I haven't been feeling very well. And another person said, it's predicated on my condition. It's important, but I can't do it. I can't hear and I can't see. I wish I could do it. And they were referring to spending time with groups of people, but I can't. Another person said, everything now is such a struggle that it is easier to skip everything. You are talking to someone in a nursing home. I am limited but by my legs. My time is not my own. And a final participant said, I can't get to Mass. I'm on a water pill and I have to be careful. I'm afraid I'll have an accident. So here you can see illustrations of how individuals' functional abilities are barriers to being able to maintain social connections. And again, once we get down to Sarah's time, she's going to be able to talk to you about ways that we can remediate some of these barriers. All right, provider policies. So 24% of residents mentioned their provider policies as barriers to being able to choose their own roommate. So for example, someone said they bring in whoever they want. We can't be involved. We get who we get. Whatever's available, that's where they put you. Sometimes they think you want a certain type of person, for example, one that talks a lot, but that's not the case. They think they know what you want, but they really don't. I don't have a choice. If I don't like the person, I have to move. I don't want to do that. She should move. So again, this speaks directly to the provider policies related to choosing your own roommate. And there are things that providers can do to increase the autonomy and choice that residents can feel towards selecting roommates if shared rooms are offered. All right, now I want to switch just a little bit and talk to you about when people told us it depended. And so this is where somebody might be viewed as changing their mind about a preference, but really it's about context. And so the importance of social interactions were situationally dependent upon the quality of the interaction and the individual's level of interest. And so I want to give you a couple of examples of this. So here's an example where preference importance changed for residents depending on the quality of the interaction. So for example, they said, well, it depends on what they like to do or like to play. So again, they didn't want to spend time with somebody that didn't like to do or play the games that this individual liked to do. It all depends on who the other person is. Some are very important, others are somewhat important. So for example, spending time with my grandchildren is very important. Spending time with other people's children, not so important. Doing things with groups of people varies on the subject, right? So I'm willing to go to a travel activity, but maybe I'm not willing to go to current events with groups of people. So this person said friends and relatives, it's very important. But again, spending time with strangers might not be that important to that individual. Depends on their mental health. I need to be able to hold a conversation with them. So this speaks to the level of cognitive ability of the other person. And so again, thinking through social needs and having people around that can carry on a conversation with you is very critical. It also depends on the type of non-staff relationship. And this was frequently mentioned, and it came up most often during the question of spending time one-on-one with someone. So someone said, depends on the relationship. For example, I have a lady friend, and it's important to be with her, but it might not be important to be with other people. Only with my son is it very important. But again, with other people, it's not that important. So the situational dependency was also mentioned for giving gifts and being around children. With regards to giving gifts, residents said, depends on the occasion and depends on who is getting it. And I like to give gifts to my children. And so thinking about specific context where people feel compelled to want to maintain important relationships and do things that they've done their whole life, like giving gifts. Level of interest was another way that people said, well, it depends. on their social preferences. And someone said, it depends on what the group is. If I like it, and as long as I'm having fun. But again, they didn't want to just participate in any kind of group or all groups. And then someone else said, only for a trip is it very important, and if it's interesting enough. And someone else said, depends on what it is, and it all depends on the people. So this individual is saying it depends on the other people that are involved in the activity about whether or not they would like to participate. And I'm sure you can all think of situations where this might have happened in your communities. Volunteering your time depended on the type of activity. If it's something I want to do, then it's important. And it depends on what it's for. So again, if it's connected to a deeply meaningful volunteer activity that the individual might have done their whole life, then it's very important. If it's something that they might not have a connection to, it might not be that important. So to sum up the results of our study, we use the voice of cognitively capable nursing home residents to understand barriers to meeting their social preferences and to explain reasons why they may change their mind about important preferences. Overall, residents perceive that they have few choices and few resources. Functional ability is a barrier to meeting their preferences for social contacts. And social participation among older adults is about quality relationships and are what make life worth living in their view. Now, obviously, with every study, there are some limitations, and so we can't generalize to other nursing home residents with severe cognitive impairment. The questions that we use are not exhaustive of all types of social contact preferences. Like, for example, I like to talk about pets, right? Like, I love my dog, and to me, that's an important connection that I have. Future studies are needed to understand how nursing home providers can remediate barriers and understand it depends to fulfill resident social contact preferences. So understanding when the context is ripe for someone to be socially engaged and when it's not. And to explore how providing preference-based person-centered care is associated with outcomes such as satisfaction with care, health, and quality of life. So that concludes the research part. And so what I want to do now is shift our focus and talk now about how to best structure a recreation program to enhance social interactions and really make a life worth living. And I want to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Humes, at this point. And Sarah, I will continue to advance the slides. Just let me know as you want me to advance.
Okay, great. Thank you, Katie. So as Katie mentioned, the primary barriers that we identified in this research study were the perceived level of choice and opportunity, the level of personal resources, and level of functional ability. Those first three barriers, I think, can be addressed by changing how the recreational services are offered in the agency. So if I, as a resident, am repeatedly taken to a card game that is not my choice, that I have not identified as a preference, and I'm taken there in order to fulfill a quota of how many activities I do within a week or a month, I'm not going to demonstrate satisfaction with my preferences being fulfilled. So I think all three of those first barriers can kind of be tackled with how we approach the services. And then the fourth barrier was provider policies, which we will touch on a little bit later with some of the points that I'm going to make. So using that example of the card game, let's say we've interviewed a resident. They have stated a preference of specifically playing gin rummy card games with others. So fortunately, the provider has a biweekly group card game on the calendar. Twice a month within that group, gin rummy is played. But the other 6 times that this group meets, they're playing other card games to meet a variety of interests. The view from the organization needs to shift into a focus. It is okay for me as a resident to attend something only 2 times a month, because that is what provides a quality interaction for me, versus noting that I attend something 8 times a month and I'm not valuing the experience. So in other words, if I am essentially not forced, but if If the agency wants me to attend something 8 times a month in order for it to be given some type of credit, I might not value even those 2 times where I'm getting to play gin rummy. So focusing that shift on providing opportunities to the residents where they can also do independent pursuits with other peers outside of those recreational groups can really help meet those needs as well. Generally speaking, there are a couple things that a quality recreation program should focus on having. So first, a recreation assessment specific to that department outside of just what is provided in the MDS. That assessment should include functional ability and recreation preferences. And our Peli assessment, as Katie said, has 72 items. Many of those items include recreation preferences, and they also delve deeper than what is just asked in the MDS. Clients served, so all of your residents, should then be categorized by their functional strengths in order to provide group programming to suit their needs. So one of the biggest things that Katie was touching on earlier was it depends. It depends on who's there. It depends on what it's for. If the focus of what you are trying to get me to do is in link with my functional strengths, I'm going to have more success. I'm going to want to be there because the people around me are going to be as successful as I am. Your calendar of activities in general should contain all domains of services. So physical activities, social, emotional, cognitive, spiritual, and creative activities. And then what is offered within these domains should relate directly to the preferences of the residents. So on that note of the domains, the current regulations, F679 for activities, has a couple intents that they have identified. One of those intents is to create opportunities for each resident to have a meaningful life by supporting his or her domains of wellness. So federally, we have identified those domains as security, autonomy, growth, connectedness, identity, joy, and meaning. So in having that calendar of activities balanced to those domains, not only are you going to meet the variety of needs and preferences your residents have, but you're also directly in line with the current regulations and what they are wanting to see us provide as agencies. Additionally, a recreation program should include groups, both large and small, opportunities for independent pursuit of leisure, and one-to-one interventions. Those one-on-one interventions can be provided by the professionals and also volunteers. But all of those things should be structured by preference and functional strength and sized as such. So for example, residents with more functional assistance needed should not be placed in the large group of 30 people that's intended to last for 60 minutes. It will not be successful for them. So you want to make sure that you are looking at those factors as well. In other words, here are the 4 key points of what I just said. We want to assess preferences using a Peli assessment and functional needs. We want to provide groups that meet categories of functional needs. We want those groups to be balanced by preferences that the residents hold and ensure that the overall program is designed with a strengths-based approach. Okay, so this beautiful chart is called a Clinical Decision-Making Guide, or CDMG for short. This is something that was created by some graduate students at Temple University in a geriatrics course that we offered. And so to kind of walk you through this grid, this is a way to help you break down the services that you provide at your agency by all of those things that I just listed that you should be evaluating. So we chose as the best tool for us to use was the Global Deterioration Scale. So on the left-hand side, you can see the Global Deterioration Scale listed. levels 3 through 7. There are other functional assessments that you can use. Even the MDS has functional abilities listed within it, so it doesn't necessarily require that you are using anything additional. In this GDS, a level 3 is someone that is functioning pretty independently, whereas a level 7 is someone who is going to be very heavily dependent and towards the end stages of dementia. So in this grid, if you see at the very top, it says the preference is exercise. So anyone in your agency who has identified exercise as a preference, using this grid, then identifying their functional abilities, you can figure out exactly how programming should be offered. So if we follow the level 3 all the way across, their goal for exercise would be that they're going to be able to maintain whatever level of exercising they want to maintain. The staff are going to need to be able to provide those residents with reminders of exercise programming that's available, and staff are going to need to have knowledge of the fact that preference exists. The types of activities that they could then participate in would be exercising independently, seated exercise groups, yoga, ball toss, all kinds of options, and one-on-one interventions of exercise. Someone that is at a higher level of functioning is going to be able to do that for between 30 and 60 minutes. Now, if you look at the bottom, the global deterioration level of 7, that person, your goal for them is just to provide a comforting environment with an emphasis on auditory and sensory stimulation to their preference. We don't want to ignore the fact that they had a preference of exercise in the past. We want to still try to provide that, but they're going to need maximum assistance from us to get everything set up independently. If that's even a thing that would be possible for them, we would just have exercise materials available and accessible. Groups that they are going to participate in would be very small, 2 to 3 clients, and individual attention is going to need to be provided to each person during the group. One-on-one interventions is likely where they're going to have the most interaction. They're going to need demonstration of the exercises, helping them to hold exercise material for tactile and visual stimulation. And they are only going to tolerate a group for about 10 to 15 minutes. So looking at this kind of layout, you are not going to have a recreation calendar that has programs listed for the month in 1-hour slots. Some of your programs are only going to run for about 10 to 15 minutes in order to meet those needs of the residents where they are at functionally. Okay, so in our research, several preferences, as Katie mentioned, stood out as having perceived barriers. I tried to go through here and give some specific suggestions to those that we identified or that were identified by the residents themselves. So the opportunity to volunteer, the opportunity to contribute, give gifts is very important. Having the providers be able to develop some activities that can meet those needs using resident advisory boards. What is it that they want to see have happen? Family members, what kinds of things were going on in the past? And even reaching out to the community, what kinds of things in the immediate community are needed that residents could help with, even just from inside the nursing home. Those kinds of things could even end up turning into small clubs or something like that. Having those opportunities to give gifts and be around children. Making cards for local children's hospitals, cards for veterans who are currently deployed. It might not be that direct interaction of giving a gift, but just knowing that they are doing something of a service. Working as a group to create something that can be given to local charities, like knitting blankets or hats. So again, within these things, you're still looking at functional ability. If I am a level 6 or 7 on that global deterioration scale, and I used to love to knit, I can still ball yarn and prep it for the next person who is a level 3 or 4 and can actually do all of that knitting. Another great way to help with volunteering, contributing, and involving the children is partnerships with local schools, providing reading programs, buddy systems where school children can come and read to the parents or have books read to them. So here is where some provider policies come into play for sure. I think it's been a policy in most places that the staff should not receive gifts from the residents. And although I do understand the reason for those kinds of things existing, maybe consideration for redefining those policies so that residents could maybe give gifts that are made in-house. So a jewelry group, a painting group, a clay group, those knitting groups, where because I made something within the facility, I can then share that. And it gives me that opportunity to contribute, give gifts without dealing with the financial burden of things like that. One other thing that I personally have had a lot of success with, and it does require a lot of work up front to set up, but I think we all have those tasks in our daily routines at work that are fairly simple. And so one of the things that I was responsible for was to schedule the entertainers that came into our agency on a weekly basis. It involved simple phone calls, managing a schedule, and writing out check requests for them to be paid when they came in. I was able to set all of this work up to a resident volunteer. So she was in my office between 3 and 6 hours a week, would make all of the phone calls to the entertainers, be able to handle all of that scheduling, and even fill out all of the check requests so that those entertainers could get paid. Like I said, it did take some work to set up front, but the value that that particular resident got from volunteering in my office was huge. And I think everybody probably has opportunities like that for residents who are able to function at that high of a level. Okay, roommate choices. This is probably one of the most difficult areas to really resolve. Fortunately, a lot of providers are able to offer private rooms, but not everyone. And so engaging the residents in some type of roommate matching process, even if it doesn't end up being fully successful, just the act of engaging them in that choice be meaningful. Using the PELI can help identify common preferences among nursing home residents, which might allow for a better match. So some of those preferences might be what you like to watch on TV or how you like to watch TV and what times of day. If you're on the phone regularly or on the phone too much, what your preferences are with regards to privacy and your morning and afternoon routines. Those kinds of things can all be identified by using the PELI, and then that can help maybe match roommates better. Further, using the PELI to link residents together with their preferences and make sure that they have opportunities to be together outside of being in their room could also offset that lack of good roommate match. So the social relationships. As Katie mentioned, this is huge across the board and in all of the research that we have found. Helping residents to maintain existing relationships. So making sure that there are systems in place for helping them to write letters, emails. Technology access can be huge now, offering access to phones, Skype, FaceTime, things like that to help maintain those relationships. Having a system in place to ask residents about their close family and friends and what kind of ways they want to maintain those relationships. Also, maintaining ties with younger generations is definitely going to be more successful with more access to technology. And nursing homes should be able to offer and assist residents with this kind of technology to really help promote that social support. Okay, so here's a little case study example of kind of what I was just referring to. We have Mrs. Washington. She's a fully oriented resident, can do most things on her own, but physically she requires full help in getting through the facility. She suffers from moderate depression and also refuses to participate in recreational activities that she previously enjoyed. So you've seen a change in what she used to do. Specifically, one of those things was board games. Her interests are also keeping in touch with old friends through the computer and interacting with children. Your building only has Wi-Fi access in certain areas, so now she cannot get to do those things on her own, even though she may be cognitively fully capable. So some ways to support her goals would include matching her with a child volunteer who can safely transport her throughout the building. She could then read books or play board games with this child volunteer. And in addition, a schedule could be created for when she can use the areas with Wi-Fi access to interact with friends living outside the community through email or social media. It's a nice connection because children tend to have a lot of interest in that email and social media type of interaction. And so it brings those two things together really well. Some more ideas. Providers can assist with fostering novel friendships among residents using preference profiles to match residents with common interests. Once you have a system in using the PELI and identifying these interests, a new resident comes in, you conduct their assessment, and you know 3 or 4 others that have those common interests. Using the probing questions found in the PELI can help identify residents' area of interest and develop social activities based on important preferences. So again, the PELI goes further than just the MDS questions with regards to more details and really helping you match those people up. Again, as I've said, creating those opportunities for people to pursue things based on their current abilities is crucial to providing that person-centered care. So without adapting your preferences that you're offering, you're not going to meet everyone's needs. And always giving residents the choice to participate in an activity, never giving up and assuming that because they haven't participated, they don't want to. Your program should always be developing and growing and adapting so that you can continue to meet needs and get people interested in engaging in some way. So by tracking these preferences, you'll start to notice when things change. And a change in preferences can usually help you understand something else that might be going on with the resident. It's not just that they're unreliable reporters of their preferences. So I've heard many times where I ask somebody what they like to do, then I invite them to that group and they don't want to come. So they must have just been telling me that they liked something just for the sake of getting me out of their room. Look at how you're offering the programs. Are you really meeting their specific interests? Who else is going to that program? Are they having trouble engaging with those particular people? Really trying to understand why they are not participating in something that they've identified as important to them. And then also a change in how they are fulfilling their preferences can be a sign of a clinical condition flaring up or recent interpersonal conflicts, increase in depressive symptoms, and all of those kinds of things. So we've all been shifting to person-centered care for a while now. And one of the ways over the years that we have shifted is to track things that affect quality by tracking the numbers of them. So showing a higher quality versus a lower quality when we have a low number of falls, low number of wounds, low number of infections, we likely have higher quality service we're providing. I have seen agencies also try to adopt that with their recreation programming. So they are counting the number of people that are attending their programs. That is not person-centered care. We need to value quality over quantity. So involvement in the meaningful experiences that are valued by the individual. Moving away from that focus of the more activities and programs attended, the better. So to go even further, one of the things that we have developed is called the EPAS, the Engagement and Preferred Activity Scale, and you can access it at this website, epastoolkit.com. This is a way to further measure resident engagement. So historically, even for me, when I started working in long-term care, we would document whether or not residents attended a program and if they were active or passive while they were there. This takes it a significant step further to provide activity professionals with a rapid assessment instrument that they can use while they are conducting their activity. And then they can measure the individual's level of engagement. It uses 3 separate variables: duration, attentiveness, and positive attitude. And all of these 3 are combined to get an overall level of engagement for that individual during that activity. So here's a quick little shot at this assessment tool. And again, this is used after you are already providing groups of preference and that meet functional strength. So a duration is the percent of time the individual spends on tasks during the activity. Again, if they're lower functioning, your activity is only going to be 10 to 15 minutes. So how much time during those 10 to 15 minutes are they spending on task? Their attentiveness is how much effort they're displaying during the activity. And then their positive attitude is the percent of time in the activity that in context feelings are expressed. So we say that because if you're doing a reminiscing group that might involve your residents getting emotional versus, crying during an exercise group, one of those is more appropriate than the other. In the end, you add these 3 scores to get a final score of disengaged, mildly engaged, moderately engaged, or highly engaged. So having this information can really help you evaluate if you are offering individuals their preferences to the way that they need them offered. So the reasons that you may need to end up improving things is activities may not be tailored to those individual specific interests. For example, I like spending time with my children, but not any other children. And so this person identified wanting to be with children, but their level of engagement during programs is low because the children are not their family. You would be better served to make sure that they are getting one-on-one time connecting to their individual grandchildren than trying to get them into intergenerational groups. The activities might not be tailored to the individual's functional level and personal abilities. So I like playing cards, but I have poor vision and poor short-term memory. I display low levels of engagement during games because I have difficulty seeing the cards and cannot remember all of the rules of the game. Again, they may be better served in a smaller group or ensuring that they're playing cards with someone that meets their functional level a little more directly. Occasionally, low levels of engagement could be a result of improper facilitation by the program leader. So another example of that functional level, I like spending time in groups. However, I display low engagement when it is interrupted by someone who is confused about where she is and what we are doing. So you do not want to have these 30 to 40 residents together with mixed levels of functioning. It will not give you as much success to meet those specific preferences. This tool can be found on that EPAS website. It is a facilitation audit tool that can be used to support training your employees. And not even necessarily when a problem is identified, but this can be used as a quality improvement tool to kind of track how things are going over time. What is the activity that's being offered and how is it being offered? What kinds of support are being offered or not? is a really great way to evaluate what you are providing to your residents. And this is also found on the EPASS Toolkit website, a beautiful diagram of quality improvement process in how, when you assess your preferences, record attendance, link those preferences to attendance, and have reports on engagement, you can really start to see that your program is meeting the needs of your residents.
Fantastic, Sarah. Thank you so much. So let's pause for a moment and give you guys a chance to enter some questions. I know I've seen a couple, and so we'll start with those. But you can still enter your questions into the Q&A or the chat box, and we should be able to see them. So Sarah, one of the first questions that came through is, where can we find the clinical decision-making guide?
Right. Katie, for me, you're a little quiet when I heard you there, but it was a little quiet. The clinical decision-making guide, we do not, I believe, have that on a website, but we can give access to that. If there is any way to be sharing, like a web document, I can share that somehow.
Yeah, why don't, how about for those attendees, we can send you the PDF. Is it a PDF or a Word document?
I can make it a PDF, a blank one, yeah.
Oh, that'd be great. And then maybe one is just an example, so we can provide a blank one and an example one. That'd be great. So we'll send it out to all of you who have registered for the webinar. And then again, if you don't receive something, just reach out to Alex or myself and we can get it to you. Okay, so the second question that we have, is there a way that providers could share their recreation assessments? I have only been using the PELI and would appreciate some samples. And so, Sarah, I want you to respond to this as well, but one thing that I will say is that the PELI is one assessment that has a lot of evidence behind it and research behind it. And so we focus on the PELI because we have over 1,000 older adult voices that contributed to the wording of the PELI items. So for example, we went and we cognitively tested each item to make sure that when we asked somebody, how important is it for you to take care of your mouth, that they weren't thinking, oh yeah, it's very important for you to watch what you say around here, when we were really trying to understand how important is it for them to take care of their teeth, mouth, and gums. And so that's one reason why we do recommend the PELI as an instrument that has a lot of evidence behind its use. And so then, Sarah, why don't you suggest that there are other recreation assessments that you might recommend?
Yeah, so I agree completely with that the PELI should be used for the preference portion of the recreation assessment. Further, though, recreation assessments should have functional status, gross motor skill assessment, fine motor skill assessment, and all of those things. And at some agencies, it may be as simple as creating a form that has all of those line items, and you can pull some of that information from the MDS or from a PT or an OT assessment as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that the recreation staff have to be conducting those motor skill assessments, but that functional ability should absolutely be part of the assessment. And there are assessments all over. There are a lot of options. For long-term care, I think maybe pulling from the resources within the agency is probably the best route to go, since it's already being conducted.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, we've got another question. Do you need training to do the EPASS?
So my colleagues have tried very hard to make the website for the EPASS very self-explanatory, and you should be able to get everything you need there. You can contact us through the website if you need further help. I would recommend, if you wanted to branch it out into your agency, that you have someone pilot use it first to work out any kinks that you have within your specific facility and then train those other employees that you want to use it. But hopefully the website should be able to walk you through using it on your own.
Great. And so let me stop here. Alex, are there any additional questions that have come in?
Hi there. No, those are the ones that I've seen so far.
Great. And so what I'd like to do for the moment, just I know we're closing in on our time together. So again, if you have some other questions, drop them in there. We'll answer them. And as we're waiting for those to come in, I want to say to you, bring out your phone if you don't have it out already, and connect with us on social media, please. We have a Facebook account, a Twitter account, and a LinkedIn account that we would love to see you on. We try and post regularly on those social media platforms with tips of the day. And then we also have a monthly newsletter, and Sarah is one of our frequent guests. We have a Dear Sarah column, and she is so fantastic at responding to so many questions that we do receive. And so you can sign up for a monthly newsletter. If you miss any of the links here, you can go to our website at preference-based-living.com to find all of these resources and to sign up for these things. And so again, we would love to have you. We don't sell your name. We don't send anybody else your information. We keep it all very private and confidential. And then what I also want to do in the last few minutes that we have here is for anybody who is wanting to receive continuing education credits, is that now what we need you to do is sign out of the webinar for us. And so there's a link that Alex will drop into the chat box so that you can click on that link and then sign out. And I will leave this up for the remainder of the webinar. And there's one more question that I see. So Sarah, you know, one of the things that you mentioned was this idea of connecting family, friends who may live geographically distant through technology. And so I'm thinking of things like FaceTime or Skype. And I'm wondering, were those, you know, what are some opportunities with volunteers maybe? Like, is that something that a volunteer that has some technical capability might be able to help? Or, you know, what are some ways that I know that staff have limited time to set up these kinds of opportunities, and so do you have any suggestions for how to coordinate schedules, for example, between residents and family members so that you've got somebody who can set up this FaceTime call at the time that everybody is available?
Right. I do think volunteers is probably one of the best ways to go. It's a lot of work to manage volunteers, but even having the process in place where you know that's a need that you want, when people ask to volunteer and what kinds of things they can do, then you can more easily fill that need. So local high schools, I mean, almost every high school now requires students to do some type of community service before they graduate. They're looking for those kinds of interactions for college applications and things like that. So if it's part of your system as an agency to seek out those opportunities, then it will be easier when people contact you. You can kind of just fit people into the schedule that way. And then also, with that shift in focus to a more quality-based interaction, your recreation department is not running group after group after group, 60-minute groups back to back. You're valuing that one-on-one interaction as well. So having 10 minutes a day dedicated to a one-on-one intervention that could, you know, a couple times a month be a phone call ends up being more possible.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. And so if there's any other questions that I'm not seeing, any other thoughts that you have, Sarah, that you'd like to convey before we sign off?
I think I might have said them all. Thanks.
Well, wonderful. Well, again, we greatly appreciate all of the individuals who joined us for this virtual seminar. We do offer these quarterly, so we hope that you are on our newsletter and will learn about the next ones that we're offering. And we're also going to be speaking in person. If you're in the Cincinnati area, we're going to be speaking at the Forum on Aging in March. And we're also going to be presenting at the Ohio Healthcare Association Conference at the end of April. And so definitely look us up. Come see us in person. We love to meet you. And again, you have our contact information, so we hope that you do reach out to us if you have any questions regarding any of the information that you've heard today, or questions about other things related to the PELI or preference-based living. And so with that, we'll close our webinar, and I want to say thank you on behalf of all of us, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.